And some of Cenla state lawmakers are urging President Donald Trump and congressional leaders to oppose further developments of carbon capture in Louisiana. Cenla State Rep. Rhonda Butler issued this letter to U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, urging for his opposition to CCS. It's in order to, quote, help protect the health and safety and property rights of Louisiana citizens. In a separate letter, members of the State House of Representatives, led by Cenla State Rep. Rodney Schermerhorn, they urge President Trump to oppose the continuation of Section 45Q tax credits for CCS, as well as any federal mandates or incentives pushing for zero emissions by 2050. Both Butler and Schermerhorn represent portions of parishes within central Louisiana. You can find both letters over on KALB.com. And next Tuesday, October 14th, an anti-CCS protest will be held in Leesville that afternoon. They will protest their opposition to CCS and, quote, the vote of the Vernon Parish Police Jury in favor of CCS, end quote.